Hi, everybody. I hope that you're doing well. So, today's podcast is very exciting, very interesting. We have a special guest, Dr. Peter Nickless, and he is a dean at Northeast College of Health Sciences. It used to be NYCC, where I graduated from. I got my doctorate and then my master's in nutrition. And I teach clinical pain and inflammation there in the nutrition program. So he's fantastic. He has a wealth of knowledge. He's working on publishing a book, which is very exciting. And he has a great background in sports nutrition, men's health, powerlifting, and just overall supplements. So I'll let him introduce himself a little bit here.
I was a typical high school athlete growing up and had my heart set on playing college football. And so I did as much as I could, as long as I could. Was athletic all through high school, all through college. And then with that in mind, I just grew up with chiropractic as just part of my life. So literally, I saw my family chiropractor more than I saw my family doctor. And I'll be honest, my family doctor really, really liked putting people on prescriptions, so I never really particularly cared for it. Not that prescriptions don't have a place. It's just, these are decisions I also made when I was 16. So I actually did my first interview as a potential student at what is now Northeast College of Health Sciences, but was at the time New York Chiropractic College. I was 16 years old, and my mother was teaching the psych course there as an adjunct. I went away to college, but I knew that that's what I wanted, and came back, went to school, graduated from there when I was about 23, 24, just about to turn 24. During that time, I had quit football and had switched over to powerlifting. And so while I was a student at Northeast or NYCC at the time, I won an AAU junior national championship, and I won an ADFBA junior world championship in powerlifting. But I really always wanted to be an Olympic weightlifter. The speed, you watch the Olympics, the speed, the athleticism. So when I graduated from chiropractic school, I targeted where my associateship would be based on where I thought the best gym would be. And I think literally I put it off on hold for about a grand total of a month, and then was watching the 2000 Olympics on TV. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, huh. And I literally reached out to a coach down in Queens. And so I was practicing in Queens, and I started working with an Olympic weightlifting coach. And I did that for about 8 years. A little more than 8 years, up till about 2009. And I managed to be able to compete at the national level, the American Open, national championships, the Arnold Classic, like every year for a while, and then managed to do a little bit of coaching during that time period, which was kind of nice. That's when, during that time period, about 2005, you're sitting there looking at it physically. There's just a limit to how long you can do some of these things, and training 6 days a week, competing 6 times a year, that kind of thing. So I started having some physical breakdowns, especially being as heavy as I was. And so I started doing the traditional post-grad route for a practicing chiropractor of picking up what I could. And what I realized is I felt it was an incomplete education. I felt like I was getting a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So I went back to school and I enrolled and got a master's in nutrition, and had no intention of using it in practice, no intention of doing anything else but try to, rather than hire a nutritionist, I said, well, why don't I get a master's in it and learn it? And so that tended to be a real life changer, because by the time I graduated, I think I entered the program at about 400 pounds, and I think I graduated, it's like 250. Unfortunately, it was around that point where I was like, you know what, maybe the injuries are a little too much. So I had some highlights during that time period. I was, at that point, I was able to hang on to about 85 to almost 90% of my max strength, but I was getting old enough that it was time to consider moving on. It also happened to be during that time period that somehow I decided I wanted to go climb mountains. And so on one of the trips to go climb Mount Washington, my sister caught wind of this, and so she introduced me to her friend who had just read Into Thin Air to try to convince me to stop climbing mountains. And it just turns out that I married her. So she, in a way, she did convince me to stop climbing mountains, because now I was married. But that's why I went from practicing in New York City to teaching at a small college in Maine, which is where she lived. And I was teaching in a general education program, and I went back to school, got a couple more degrees, but I was teaching general health sciences, and I really wanted to teach nutrition. And so a job at Northeast opened up, and I applied for it and came there, and I've been there for, it's my 12th year. And so I think, athletically, I've still maintained coaching. I still maintain training. I will probably do some kind of competition in the next 6 months. Right now, with my daughter being heavily invested in sports, a lot of it's training her. So it's like, I've been, up until now, I've always been a coach on her team. I don't know if I'm going to coach again in the future, but I will always be working with her as far as that's concerned. But the summers are kind of for me to get back into fighting shape. And so I think I'm doing something possibly in August. I'm debating to see if I want to try to do the Olympic weightlifting state championships in the old man division in September if my shoulders hold up. But at the moment, something.
Good.
So how is this going? How's the podcasting going?
It's really fun. I think we almost have 2 months under our belt. It's just been something I've been thinking about for 10 years, and I figure why not?
Well, you're a better person than I, because like I've been, since podcasting first came out, I wanted to do something, and I just don't have the courage to sit there and, like, I realize that I'm not going to have guests. I wouldn't have guests right away. So right. I'd have to just talk, and I'm not good at that. So, but, because I was always, in terms of the old weightlifting stories and stuff like that, which is a different genre. So you're an expert in this. So you kind of have to talk about it with people. And so the problem is, all the weightlifters I don't know that I'd want to put them on.
Well, it's Rogan, I mean, look how he started out.
Yes.
Well,
yeah. So it gets a little, but it's one of those things where I've only done this once. Robert Silverman, and it was about ketogenic diets, I think. But my next research topic, now that I've finished the one book, is actually getting into more the longevity side of aging. Not so much the longevity, live longer kind of thing, but more just quality years. And right. I'm a big fan of, doesn't have to be competitive strength training, but strength training, movement. I think too many strength trainers don't do enough exercise. Too many exercisers don't do enough strength training. Sleep, all that stuff. Sleep, water, stress. All these things that are in relation to your expertise specifically is inflammation. And that's kind of the next area I kind of want to dig a little deeper into, is that whole concept of aging a little bit more gracefully, I guess.
Now, what have you noticed from where you were 20, 25 years ago to where you are now with sports nutrition and health? Like, what are you doing different diet-wise, supplement-wise?
All right. Well, yeah, it's a really good question. The industry has changed dramatically. So when I was in chiropractic school, I was competing in powerlifting, and at that time, most sports nutrition that you had come across came into like two categories. You had like bodybuilding bro science, and then you had the hard science sports nutrition, which honestly, a lot of it was focused towards endurance athletics. And so you'd get these almost like one size fits all approaches to sports nutrition, but they're always taken from the framework of, and because they're talking about energy systems and they're talking about carbohydrate metabolism, things like that. And it's all useful once you start knowing the context. But for, at that point, a hardcore, I want to lift as heavy a thing as possible one time and then put it down and go eat in between lifts, it's not the same thing. And so you got into the zone of, okay, if you're going to be a drug-free athlete, you need protein and you need calories. And it was protein, calories. And as far as micronutrients were concerned, it was take a multivitamin, you're fine. And that was my entire that was my entire world. And so I'd take nutrition classes. And one of the things that would annoy me is I would take these nutrition classes, and I took sports nutrition classes, and like they'd spend all this time just talking about predominantly endurance athletics. So it was like I knew a heck of a lot about sodium bicarbonate, but like it didn't help me because I'm doing a single lift in competition. Powerlifting is squat, bench, and deadlift. 3 attempts to lift your heaviest weight, and then they add your heaviest squat, your heaviest bench, your heaviest deadlift together. Olympic weightlifting is where I spent the majority of my adult years. Snatch, clean and jerk, 3 attempts, heaviest snatch plus heaviest clean and jerk equals your total. So you're talking about 3 less than a second exertions on the platform. So we're not getting into heavy energy systems or aerobic glycolysis or anything like that. So that's where you got into this realm where in the late 90s, say early 2000s, you got very large super heavyweights, and I was a super heavyweight. So in Olympic weightlifting, super heavyweight at the time started at about 232 pounds. Now it's gone up a little bit in terms of where it starts, but there was no cap on what you could weigh. So you had a ton of guys at the Olympic level weighing about 400 pounds. And I did most of my competition days at about 400 to about 420 pounds. And that was because the quickest way to guarantee you were going to recover was eat,
Wow.
and from that, sports nutrition starts getting into a weird zone, because there's a great competitive lifter who, the gentleman's relatively known for going up and down weight classes. So he would go up, set a world record at a high weight class, and then drop as much weight as he could to try to duplicate that at a lighter weight class. And so he said, is when I was and he did this all in the 90s and early 2000s, back when it was a little different. And he said, it's like when I was, for him, the heavyweight was when I was 300 pounds. I didn't have to pay attention to micronutrients or macronutrient blend and things like that. Because the assumption is if I'm eating enough calories to bulk myself up to 300 pounds, I'm probably getting enough protein. I'm probably getting enough, one would argue that he's probably got a couple of micronutrient issues, because I doubt he was eating a very varied diet. But he didn't pay much attention to it. It was when he went leaner that he had to do it. Now, interestingly, now you're starting to see athletes who are able to compete at a higher level, but not have to put on as much excess body fat, not have to put on some excess size. So you will still see in the world's strongest man competitions, people eating 10,000 calories a day and things like that. But for the most part, you're seeing those numbers drop. Even Michael Phelps, with that famous 10,000 calories in Beijing, he did say when he went back, when he went to the next Olympics, he was nowhere near that amount of calories. He had gotten it dialed down to just what he needed, and he was still pretty darn successful.
Right.
One of the things I'm seeing now is there's more. I like the fact that there's a much more varied research bed. It's not just, hey, eat protein, the more the better. But on the other hand, we always had this battle between the bodybuilders telling you to eat like protein almost exclusively, and the nutrition advice of anything more than 0.8 grams per kilo is excessive. Or was it the traditional RDA was like 80 grams a day? I was like, well, that's just not enough for a 220-pound male athlete. Right. I think the sports nutrition side tends to blend itself into men's health, because I think my point of view on it is different now than it was when I was still an active athlete. Like, I'm still active, but not, my days of chasing the Olympic dream are gone. So now it kind of dives into a little bit about men's health and sleep and recovery and things like that, because it's not like I still take things from the United States Anti-Doping Agency, World Anti-Doping Agency viewpoint. And it's one of my criticisms on the supplement side as well is, the rush to go from food to supplement, actually supplement before food in many cases. One of the biggest criticisms of the sports nutrition world is that marketing directly to people in the gym or athletes. And my entire athletic career, I probably took less than 3 or 4 supplements the entire time. And it was because at the time, anywhere from 2000 to the end of my serious career was probably about 2009. I guess as early as 97, but anywhere during that time, you're getting drug tested, or the threat of drug test was always looming. And there's just nothing you could trust. And so like the whole NSF, certified safe for sport stuff was not really a big factor. So creatine, I take it now. It's great. Love it. I never touched it when I was competing. Even protein, I didn't take because I just ate a lot, So I could have done more. I could have gotten away with more, but we'd all heard horror stories, and we've known, like, we had an athlete who had been on our team before I got there who had failed a drug test for something that was in a supplement she had taken, and she ended up winning a lawsuit over it. But it doesn't matter. You still lose your medal.
Right.
It's still no. And that's the thing is, I mean, I will say, unfortunately, I don't have the statistics directly in front of me, but in just doing the research for the book, I was pulling up a lot of information about tainted supplements, and it's just, and I know the Department of Defense keeps a website. I think I don't know if it's changed names. It was nutrition411.org, and it had a list. I mean, and they don't have the budget to test everything, but they had a list, and you could go through and you could actually search, and it'll tell you, this is a supplement we pulled, this is what we found, these are what it had in it. And so when they find it, they'll contact the maker and deal with it. But how many, if they're finding one, there's probably 10 on the market. And what they're finding things are, theoretically prescription anabolics, even though they're not really prescribed that often. Amphetamines, so weight loss supplements have a lot of, or commonly have, I mean, I don't want to have a lot of amphetamines in them, and have a lot of so you'll think things like you'll have a lot of these growth supplements, and some of the supplements that are marketed as testosterone replacement,
Right.
or testosterone boosting supplements will have testosterone derivatives in there, at minimum pro hormones. And then you get into the world of, because this is all what's marketed out there, now you're getting into peptides, and you can buy them on Amazon, because they're technically not illegal. The only thing is it'll say things like for animal use only, or they'll say for oral use only, but they're selling it to you in an injectable vial, and they're not really tested the same way. At least with a prescription anabolic, it's tested, and they know the side effects, they know the risks, and that. This, you're getting into kind of no man's land, but you're getting to things that are like growth hormone analogs, or all sorts of things, and they're available on Amazon any day of the week. So that's an area where I get a little, I don't like it, because there's this whole market out there, I think, preying on weekend warrior type athletes. And it's funny because through my daughter, I've gotten a chance to get a peek in on what's happening at like Colgate University's women's ice hockey team, and they've got a team of professionals working with them. And so they've got trainers, they've got nutrition coaches and things like that. And I've seen higher end athletes who've got that. They're not the most susceptible to this. It's the 17-year-old who's going to the gym who reads about something on a message board or on Reddit or something, and then they spend 5 minutes on Amazon and they find it, and you literally can buy like a bottle of peptides, needles, and bacteriostatic water, all delivered from Amazon, perfectly, potentially legal, quasi-legal, and now they're injecting something, they have no idea what it is.
Right.
Or,
And that's scary.
It's extremely scary. So,
yeah.
But, so.
Interesting. So from your research, does it matter? Because I know, like, my husband's on this Fountain of Youth because he's going to turn 40 this year. He's looking at like Tongat Ali and Lion's Mane and all these things, and he'll ask me about something, and I'll look at the research. From your research, does it matter if it's like in the U.S. versus outside the U.S. with being tainted?
Yes, more so than others, just because there's at least some degree of quality control. So a couple years back, I did this. I did this like week-long thing by the Office of Dietary Supplementation. It was kind of like a symposio where they brought in all these nutrition students, nutrition researchers, and nutrition faculty. But it was just really a presentation from the Office of Dietary Supplementation, and they were going through their testing process. And the reality is they're not testing. They know that. But it's more if we get a tip off or if we start hearing something's too good to be true. So they always talk about, the example they were giving was it the green coffee weight loss wonder that Dr. Oz was promoting. And in the end, they ended up having to retract everything because there really wasn't anything to support that. But they're spending most of that money. And what their comment was, their budget is, if the government's budget is a dollar, they're getting like a penny, and then they're putting like an eighth of a penny towards this. There's no regulation, but enough that they're going after it. And they're seeing it in the US, but I guess the US has got a little bit of a market. The US has got a little bit of a market more towards trying to police it a little bit versus, because you got to remember, some of these things are actually perfectly legal in other countries.
Right.
So if you're living in Texas, you can drive over the border and go buy something and then be back, later that day. So they don't have the pressure to have their, to have a pure substance, but I also think that, we have a rise in American companies that are starting to self-police. And that's what I was saying, is like the NSF certified stuff that didn't exist when I was competing. And now, I just stayed away from most supplements. I took a multivitamin, which theoretically was a risk, but I took a multivitamin, but that was about it. And now, you've got, was it the Clean Athlete
yes. Yep.
product line? They're finally starting to get products that like I actually would have wanted to take, because everything they had was based on like endurance athletes. So I think there's a lot of good stuff out there, and there's a lot of good companies out there. And I just, I don't want, I hate to shill for certain companies, but and they don't make everything I want, but I trust standard process because I've been there, and I hate to say it, I've been there. I've seen their production process. I didn't see anybody in a weird mustache, pouring stuff into a vat in the corner. So I didn't, but
know your source and look at the research.
Yeah. And if a supplement is, 1/3 of the price of, of another supplement, sometimes it's labeling, sometimes it's not, so there was always that discrepancy. So now that they're actually diving into it and starting to look at, we need to target protein towards the actual sport. That's awesome to see. The fact that they've actually gone through and the International Society of Sports Nutrition actually is now saying, hey, you know what, the bodybuilders weren't completely wrong. And one of the things I like is the fact that a lot of the research that we're seeing in the last 10 years is seeing why some of these bodybuilders were adhering to these very, dogmatic approaches to things. It's just, there's always a contextual point to it. And unfortunately, the mass sports media, in terms of bodybuilding culture magazines, weightlifting magazines, things like that, you get lost, right? So you always hear these high protein points being mentioned in bodybuilding. It's like, hey, I've heard numbers as high as 4 grams of protein per pound, and I've never heard that duplicated by anybody with any kind of research background. But traditionally, you always hear about 2 grams a pound, sometimes a little bit more. But then you'll hear like the actual kind of research side of it, which is like, well, really anywhere from about 1.4 grams per kilo, 2 grams per kilo at kind of the high end really is in it targeted to sports. So, heavy weightlifting would use a little bit higher amount, although technically the longer you're in it, you don't need as much because you're not putting on as much size as quickly. But on the other hand, heavy endurance athletics, because the potential for a long distance runner, an ultra marathoner, to start using protein as an energy source, or just the breakdown of muscle tissue as they're exercising, needs a higher amount of protein as well. But it was never getting quite to that level. And then the International Society of Sports Nutrition went through and they're looking at it. And I thought it was a great point that they made, is there are aesthetic benefits to it. So it's not improving your performance. So that's where you get into that whole middle ground of, well, it's not really improving your performance. You're not going to lift more weight because you're eating more, but there are aesthetic benefits and things like that. And so it starts to contextualize a little bit. Why would they be saying such a high amount? And it's, the metabolic inefficiency of protein in general. The fact that the more protein they're eating, if they're keeping to a certain caloric level, they're probably replacing other foods that might be more problematic for their physique and things. And just then you throw in the fact that like these aren't hard and fast numbers, so your requirements may fluctuate a little bit depending on the needs you're putting on them. So they're making sure they have enough. As somebody who teaches clinical nutrition for pain and inflammation, I'm sure you love the number of influencers who are just going to say it's just calories in and calories out, and it doesn't matter if it's, you know. And so like I've seen literal competitive athletes who compete at a high level, who, you know, their pre-workout snack is a Pop-Tart.
Yes.
And you sit there and you say, well, yeah, it at your level, it probably improves your performance today because you're able to compete. And as long as you're not eating a box of Pop-Tarts, it's probably not hurting you aesthetically. But what's the long-term implication? You know, what is a lifetime of eating those processed foods gonna do? And I hate to say it, but I've seen too many athletes after they retire balloon up because they maintain these eating habits and then they're not being very physical anymore.
100%. Yep.
So like for me, it's that realization that, oh my God, there's a life after sports, you know. And I know that in my 20s and 30s, I just didn't care. You know, it was like,
think about it.
well, I was competing at 400 pounds. I clearly didn't care. And then all of a sudden, you know, it's funny because like how I got into nutrition in the first place is, you know, I did the unthinkable. I hit 30, and you know, I went from being invincible to all of a sudden everything ached all the time. I was like, well, what else can I do? Maybe, you know, maybe eating a diet that consists of more than like 6 or 7 things. Maybe stop eating like a 12-year-old might make a difference. And it's interesting because I've got different phases of things that I've done in my life, and I've got periods where I followed a very strict diet and saw amazing results from just having a very strict diet. And then, you know, then I had a daughter, and so things loosened up by like, it's kind of hard to have a young one and be super strict. And then I've tightened, you know, then I tightened it up, got strict again, and then, you know, so different phases. But now I kind of like looking at it from a framework of how do we get optimal performance without sacrificing these long-term, because I'm hitting the older generation of lifters. So I'm 48, and my brother's still competing in powerlifting. He's about 52, and most of the people we know in this area of age group are the people that we're in their, you know, late 40s, early 50s, and they're all starting to take blood pressure medications.
Wow.
And it's like, okay, well, maybe we should look at this. You know, maybe these are some things we could be doing and changing to not, you know, I don't think it's a rite of passage that it's like, hey, you just hit a certain age and you got to take blood pressure medication. Okay. So maybe we need to look at those kind of things. So that's how I've changed. What I like is that the industry's gotten a lot more sports specific and a little bit more of an emphasis on, you know, what is the dietary approach that's going to fit this sport versus that sport. And it's kind of hard because if you look at the history of sports nutrition, I mean, I forget the Olympics, but there's an Olympics where they're drinking champagne during the event to fuel performance, and they were having trouble with people completing the event because they were getting drunk. You know, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, like literally, it was the 60s where Gatorade was invented because they're like, what's going on? These people are, you know, they're just figuring out, oh my God, these we're losing electrolytes. We need to replace it. And none of that was transferable to the average sport. And so, you know, I was the tail end of the generation where drinking water during football practice was considered a sign of weakness. So, I mean, we're talking phase shifts in terms of growth.
So for our listeners, especially the guys who are listening, who are in that 30 to 55, 60 age group, what would be your recommendations for just kind of optimizing health, recovery, testosterone, muscle mass, just kind of aging well, but being able to perform?
All right. I mean, first and foremost, it's got to start with the diet, right? It's got to start with the diet, and you know, the things that, and we all notice after a certain age, the things I could eat when I was in my 20s, I can't eat now, right? So, um, like I've never had an issue with certain foods my entire life, and now if I eat too much pizza, my stomach hurts all night, and so I, I find that there needs to be a focus on, I do think the first thing you need to make sure that you're getting enough protein in. I think that's the starting point for everything. And I think that's males, females. We need to make sure you're getting enough protein in. You really need to know how much protein you need based on what your activity's like and try to target it that way. I'd bump it up maybe about 20% every decade over 30, just because, it becomes an issue. I mean, sarcopenia starts to become a major problem. Um, Carbohydrate choices, everything you put in your mouth has got, it's for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? So everything you put in your mouth has got some impact. And yes, you will get energy benefits from processed carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, but, it's not going to be the best long term. And so that's where I would stick. That's why I get into more of the whole foods approach. And, there's a lot you can do where you can still get, you can perform really well with a whole foods based diet. I kind of put that emphasis on protein first, carbohydrates second, but never, I just don't think low fat's the best way to go for any athlete ever. I prefer your carbohydrate sources be as close to original source as possible, the least refined. Really try to limit sugar. It's one of those things that's really great when you're a little kid on Easter, but it's not so phenomenal if you're trying to compete, and especially when you're trying to recover from injuries. So solidify the diet first. I wouldn't make any supplementation recommendations until you've had the diet under control for a few months. And like literally my recommendation is always, if you've not paid attention to your diet before you go and you try to just start over from scratch, just start recording what you're eating. Recording what you're eating, pay attention to it, and then start paring it down. And then, I always, from a diet standpoint, I always love David Seaman's approach. It's let's take out the refined carbohydrates, let's take out the refined sugars, let's take out the refined oils, let's switch from feedlot cattle to feedlot raised meats to the free range, real good quality free range, and grass fed. And that's not just marketing. That is, there's the fatty acid profiles change, and I think that's where I would start. And then from a supplementation standpoint, I know there's that whole concept with vitamins in terms of the whole, calling it expensive urine. And I fully encourage everybody to eat as many different vegetables as possible, all the colors of the rainbow, invite Roy G. Biv to dinner. But I also realize we live in the real world, and a lot of people are working very long days, trying to get to the gym, trying to eat something. And the hard part is that's where convenience foods creep in. So I'm a fan of meal prep. I'm a fan of meal prep, pre-planning, because whenever I pre-plan, I eat the way I'm supposed to. Whenever I don't pre-plan, I end up grabbing something on the run. And it's, it's like, was it, it's, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And so I'm always a huge fan of that. So as much as I like to think that, I like, something I would have never said in my 20s, but I like a nice big dinner salad with my wife. It's not my favorite thing in the world to eat, but my favorite thing in the world to eat is not so good for me anymore. It never really was. But when we do make a salad, it's so much fun. It's better for me to have as many different colors, to many different vegetables. I don't personally like tomatoes, but then again, I've hit this point in my life where I realize that not everything I like is what I should be eating. So I'll eat the tomatoes anyway, sometimes. But I still think the ounce of protection of the multivitamin is still a good idea. Again, good quality source, probably the best you can find. there's a couple micronutrients that as we age, we're going to need a little more vitamin D, a little more magnesium, a little more zinc, things like that. Um, Supplementation, really, I think supplementation can't be shotgunned, so it needs to be targeted to a specific benefit. Like, there's really no real benefit for my wife to take creatine, right? She's not doing any heavy lifting. She's not doing any heavy athletic events. Her working out is for general health and fitness. So for me, it helps. It's a huge benefit. And I'm one of those super responders. So when I take it, unfortunately, my body weight will balloon up by about 10 pounds, but I'll lift more.
Right.
And it's one of those things where, like, it's one of those jokes where it's like, well, what are you taking? And it's creatine. And it's dirt cheap, and it's probably one of the most studied supplements out there. Although, again, cheaper is not always better in terms of quality.
You like
Um,
monohydrate, or what form do you like?
I think monohydrate's fine. I know there are some forms that are more quickly absorbable, but over the course of a 30-day period, it really doesn't matter how quickly you get it into your system, because over the course of a 30-day period, it's going to stay about the same. So I don't think going into something extremely involved. I've had good luck with monohydrate, and so I haven't played around with. Well, I once or twice played around with other sources. Um, you know, what else? From a supplement standpoint, I do supplement with protein, and I know it's easy to have enough protein in your diet to meet the requirements through food. It's absolutely doable. It's absolutely possible. But I'm married to a pescatarian, and so and my daughter doesn't eat a lot of meat. So when I'm sitting there, if I'm sitting there and eating, you know, a big steak or something, they're looking at me like, the hell. So I do eat meat in front of them, but, like, it's just nowhere near as much as my body weight would recommend and what I feel I perform best with. So it's not a ton, but, like, so I tend to I actually mix it with Greek yogurt because I don't really like protein shakes. So
Yeah.
I'll get a plain Greek yogurt and put a scoop of protein in there.
Yeah.
And maybe a little granola or something, depending on where I'm at. But that's just because I'm just not a big shake person. And I found I don't digest it as well as a shake. But if I'm eating it, I actually get some. I also actually feel like it's a good breakfast. So as opposed to drink a shake. And I don't go much into pre-workouts at my age. Coffee is my favorite pre-workout. I think there's a lot of pre-workout supplements that work, but I also think there's a lot that are questionable. I've used them. I never once used them. Back in the days when I was, clean and jerking close to 400 pounds, it never touched my head. It was caffeine. That's it. But and I'm not going to say that was the paragon of health, because I think I probably took more ibuprofen than any 5 people should. Which, again, that's the reason I got into nutrition, because I kept getting injured. Fluids, hydration, absolutely essential, and probably one of the more overlooked items. Sleep. I personally, if you're not getting enough sleep, you're not going to be able to perform, and you're going to get injured, you're going to recover. I think over the age of 35, your warm-up should probably take at least the third of your workout. So I'm not saying work out less, I'm saying add a little more time in.
Right.
Just this summer, oh my God, it's almost another year. Just last summer, I was just trying to get a quick workout in. I had a Zoom call at early evening. I'm like, let me just get a quick workout in. I started doing snatches light. I tore my rotator cuff, 30% tear, just because I take a little extra time, a little extra effort, and luckily it's healed pretty quickly. But I'm back to full capacity and all that. But the extra time to recover, all those annoying little supportive muscles, because what I found is, as I've gotten older, my prime movers are just as good in some ways than they've been, or I can get them back to a high percentage. But all those supportive muscles that
Yes.
never really got enough work are the ones that are if I'm going to get a failure, it's going to be there. And so, and I will say, this is something that I'm learning more recently. And I have a gentleman who's in his late 50s who's managed to really maintain a high level of performance. And the one thing I'll tell him is he might spend half of his workout time, doing all of those little supportive exercises that are no fun whatsoever. So, I mean, the usual supportive recovery methods as well. I mean, it's just so good. Ice is a really good thing. So,
Yeah, for sure.
I'm, and it's kind of funny, just from the warm-up perspective. I mean, I'm debating putting an infrared sauna down here in the basement. So, my work office is in the basement, but also I have a whole gym in the basement. So, I've got a platform and all sorts. It kind of looks a little scary, the amount of weights down there, but I can't lift them all anymore, but I still have them. But I'm thinking about putting an infrared sauna in there as well, just because that it helps me warm up. It's so good.
What do you think about I've seen mixed reviews. Some people are pro ice baths. Some people say it raises your cortisol too much. What are your thoughts on that with athletes or just in general?
I can't get into them. I tried them. I couldn't get into them.
Yeah.
My worry right now at this age is cortisol control.
Yeah.
If you look, was it the you look at the biochemistry of cholesterol degradation to testosterone. Higher cortisol, lower testosterone, lower estrogen, and and that's why there's a study about phosphatidylserine, right? And the higher dosage is like 600 milligrams of phosphatidylserine. You actually start to see an increase. You'll see a decrease in cortisol, increases in free testosterone in adult male athletes or older male athletes. And I think at this age, cortisol, because we live in too stressful an environment.
Right.
I don't think I've managed to get through a week in the past year without something being stressful. And it's, it could be an angry student email. It could be, my car broke down, but it also could be the physical stress of working out, not getting enough sleep, and everything like that. So I think cortisol control has become extremely important in my life. So, and I do think sometimes ice baths, I've seen enough evidence to make me shy away from them. But I also still like to use, I like ice massage, but it's more focal, not systemic. And it's really based and targeted on need. Because I know there's research that's supportive and there's research that's negative with things like foam rolling.
Right.
But I find it helps loosen me up. I don't think it has the long-term effect that it's purported to have, but I do think it helps me prepare to be able to train. And I'd like to say that at this point, I like to stay about 70% of where I was at my functional capacity, but I'm not putting in as much work. So when I was lifting at my best, not only did I weigh 400 pounds, I was training 5-6 days a week. I was, I was not going out. I was focusing 100% of my energy on it. And so, just even the act of having kids, grandkids, coaching hockey, working, going to school, all that stuff. It just, if the fact that I can maintain about 70% of where I was at my best, but still put in probably about 30% of the work. And that doesn't mean I still do something physical every single day, because I think the older you get, I'd rather do more, cut down the overall intensity, but work out a little more frequency for shorter duration. And so I'll do a little something every day.
Yeah.
But
be functional.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean like every Sunday, this Sunday, like tonight I'm doing because now we're doing more slow lumbering stuff like bench pressing. But tonight, my brother's coming over and we'll do a very light bench press workout. But on Sunday, we're going to go to one of our teammates' houses and we will go as heavy as we possibly can. So it's not that, Yeah, it's just the difference is it's just you can't drive that car, with a high RPM 24/7. It's just going to break down.
Right.
So
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing and taking the time. And I'm sure we'll get more questions, so I'm sure we'll have to have you back on at some point. So
Sure, absolutely.
so we'll let you go. Thanks, Peter. All right.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.